We are Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14, presented by Stakes. It is Wednesday morning. We are reacting to the college football playoff rankings of last night. Let's start off with the top 10. Georgia 1, followed by Ohio State, Michigan, TCU, Tennessee coming in at 5, followed by Oregon, LSU, USC, Alabama, and Clemson. I don't think a huge surprise here in our top 5. I think the thing I wondered was, would it be TCU or Tennessee at 5? I guess that's what most people thought. And TCU comes in at 4, the Vols at 5, but I mean, it really does not matter. I don't think, because there's so much to come. So I think Tennessee more than likely controls its own destiny. I'll get into some of the reasons of that later. But anyway, those are the facts. Your reaction to that?
Yeah, I think that was pretty much it. I don't think there was any shock at all in terms of the top three in that order with Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan. I think the question was just going to be would TCU slide up to 4 and would Tennessee drop from 1 to 5, even with the loss. And I think, again, if you're basing it on the number on the right side of the dash, right, I don't think it's that surprising to see TCU move to 4. Now, the debate will continue of whether, they should be in that spot. I know people will debate that, but there's still it's a power conference team that's undefeated, and I mean, they've beaten, what is it, Chris? I think they've beaten 4 top 20 teams to this point. Given where they were at the time, I think that was
Yeah.
Oklahoma, Kansas, Oklahoma State, and Kansas State. They won those 4 games in a row. And so, I mean, they'll have another chance for another top 20 win this weekend. They got to play at Texas. Obviously, I'll say, kind of like I said with the Clemson Notre Dame game, I think this is one you circle because realistically, if you look at TCU's remaining schedule, they're at Texas, at Baylor, which, I still think even with Baylor, they're 6-3. They've lost some games, but that's still a tricky matchup, I think, on the road. So 2 big games coming up for TCU, and then they get Iowa State after that at home to finish the season. Then, of course, you've got the Big 12 title game, which, that they will be there depending on the outcome of these next several games. So I'm not stunned, again, just because the top 4 are all undefeated. And Tennessee losing that game, we talked about kind of how close all these teams felt like they were together. Tennessee had the best resume going into the Georgia game, but now Georgia the clear number 1 after winning that game. I think Ohio State, Michigan the clear 2 and 3, and now I think the debate is on, Chris. Of We've talked about the Tennessee versus TCU discussion, but I think what the more interesting debate is going to be is
Yeah, I know where you're going.
is Tennessee being at 5 still with 1 loss, and then you've got a couple of those Pac-12 teams near them, with an Oregon, with the USC, LSU's moved up to 7. I think that's where the discussion starts to get a little interesting because if Tennessee wins out and one of these teams in front of them fall, and Georgia wins out, right? We've said that. I mean, Georgia's getting to the SEC championship in that scenario. Tennessee would be out of the SEC championship, but I think that's where things start to get interesting in that situation.
You didn't actually mention the team I thought you were going to mention, which was Michigan, and I'll get into the
Well,
whys of that
their
later.
non-conference schedule, yeah, that's going to be a big talking point, I think, for them. So,
Well, and let's do this. We're going to dive into some individual teams here in a moment. I wanted to go to 538 today. 538 is the political site that also does some sports projections. They've got a model that I think I mean, look, it may not be perfect, but it's better than anything we have. I would tell you to go to that site because you can run some scenarios where this happens and that happens. And in that case, what's it look like, which is easier than any other tool we've got. According to 538, odds to make the playoff. I'm going to give you the top, I don't know, 10 or 15 here. And this is projecting what 538's model thinks is going to happen from here on out with teams winning and losing and such. Georgia, 83%. Ohio State, 66%. Michigan, 45%. Tennessee at 4 with 41%. followed by TCU 35%. Now this one really surprises me. Clemson 33%. Oregon
I don't.
22%. I don't either, and we can dive into that one too.
Yeah, that's fine.
Oregon 22%, LSU 14%, USC 13, UCLA 10, Utah 7, Alabama and Texas also at 7, UNC at 6%, Ole Miss at 5%, Baylor at 2%, and then you've got a bunch of teams 1% or under at that point. The Clemson one is surprising, and like I said, we can dive into that in a minute. But I think the most important thing is, what do you do with a one-loss Tennessee and a one-loss Michigan? In my mind, and okay, let's see what that takes to get there. Right, Tennessee has got to beat Missouri at home Saturday, and then win at South Carolina and Vanderbilt. The Vanderbilt game is 3 hours to the east of that campus. Vanderbilt's bad, and it's also going to be overrun with Tennessee fans in that stadium, so that's not really a road game for whatever that's worth. Michigan has got remaining games with Nebraska, Illinois, and Ohio State. Now, look, if Michigan beats Ohio State, then this is a different discussion. Really, the discussion is a one-loss Ohio State, a one-loss Michigan versus a one-loss Tennessee. Okay, Ohio State, let's start with Ohio State. It's got a win at Penn State. It's got a win over Notre Dame that's starting to look a little better. And then it's got what I would call NIT wins, if you had an NIT for football. Wisconsin, Iowa, maybe Michigan State. Other than that, I don't know that Toledo, Rutgers, Northwestern, Arizona State, too much for anybody. Games coming up. Indiana, that's not going to do anything. At Maryland, that's a quality win if you get it. And then, of course, Michigan. For Michigan, you've got a win over Penn State, a win over a quality Maryland team, a win at Iowa for whatever that's worth, NIT win. Michigan State, and then the other 4 wins at Indiana, which won't really do anything. At Rutgers, same thing. And then Michigan's got wins over 3 of probably the bottom 10 teams in the FCS. FBS in Colorado State, Connecticut, and Hawaii. If Michigan can beat Illinois, that's a nice win. Nebraska is not going to do much. And, of course, the winner of that Ohio State game is everything. So here's your question, and sorry for the long-winded way to get there. To me, it is a one-loss Ohio State or Michigan team, which I think is what's going to happen. I think one will be unbeaten, one will have one loss.
Yeah.
Right. One, because one has to. But my point is, I don't see either of them losing again. Now, look, here's the weird scenario. If Ohio State, by chance, were to lose at Maryland, let's not forget, Ohio State struggled at Northwestern over the weekend, although I think there was a pretty good rain there, and that probably affected things. That might be your one scenario that people aren't talking about, is if Maryland beats Ohio State, and then Ohio State beats Michigan, then you got 2 one-loss Big Ten teams. What do you do there? That's really confusing. But whoever emerges, let's just presume that one team's unbeaten. Then you got a one-loss Big Ten team, which I would think would be Michigan right now, against a one-loss Tennessee team. To me, Tennessee's resume is better. Although Tennessee, the one detriment to the Vols' resume, if there's anything, it's the wins over Ball State and Akron aren't good either. But if you want to go the bad win scenario, Michigan's got more wins against horrible teams, so I don't think that's a factor. Tennessee would have wins over LSU, Alabama. The LSU win on the road. Kentucky, Florida's looking a little better every week, and then at Pitt. Michigan's wins, presuming it loses to Ohio State, you're looking at Penn State and Maryland are nice wins. Iowa on the road, decent win. Michigan State, and then Illinois would be a nice win too. In my mind, Tennessee's got a better resume at that point. Of course, Michigan add in the computers, but to me, that's what I'm looking at. I don't really pay much attention to Tennessee at 5. I'm going, what do you do with Tennessee versus a one-loss Big Ten team? And in my opinion, Tennessee's got the better resume.
Whew, my head's spinning.
Yeah, sorry.
With all these scenarios, I mean, I would agree with that. I think, but here's something else too. I think we have to consider is style points matter, whether we want to admit it or not. In terms of if it's Michigan, Ohio State, the loser, how do you lose that game? I think that will factor into the mix. Um, whether we want to say it will or not, but I think it's right. I mean, wouldn't you agree if it's an overtime game and somebody loses by a field goal? I mean, do both teams get in just based off of that? I mean, I think it's and I think those are the kind of things that whether
You're
we
saying like if Michigan, Ohio State comes down to overtime in a field goal. Okay.
right. I think
Yeah.
those are the, but
Fair
again,
enough.
I'm not saying that I just think that's going to matter if you get to some of those tiny things. And I'm not saying it's an official metric or statistic or anything like that, but I do think those are things that you have to think about when you get into those kind of scenarios. It's the same thing like with an SEC championship, right? Um, it's, I think what I found very interesting is, and we're not a Pac-12 show here, but the fact that a one-loss Tennessee is still at this moment ahead of does if Tennessee wins out and the Pac-12 winner, which is going to be who, Chris? Either Oregon or USC, I assume, right? Um, am I right on that? I haven't looked up anything else, but
Well, I mean, you've got USC and UCLA both at 8-1. Oregon also at 8-1. I'm not familiar with the tiebreakers and all that stuff there either, but and you've
so
also
let's
got
just
Utah ranked at 13 in the playoff rankings at 7-2, which I don't think Utah is going to make the playoff, but that is a quality win opportunity. The computers have continued to love Utah all year. The Utes are right now,
right.
top 10 team by most of the computers. So that may be a little bit of an X factor is what does a win over Utah weigh in this if the Pac-12 gets in the picture? I know we're going way out in the weeds at this point, but
Yeah, sorry, that wasn't. I was trying to put it another way in terms of looking at the scenario for the Pac-12, no matter who it is, whether it's Oregon, whether it's USC, UCLA, Utah, whoever. If we just look at it right now, the teams that are at the front of that, which is Oregon and USC, they're the two ahead of UCLA and Utah at the moment. If Tennessee wins out, Pac-12 champion, no matter who it is, it's do they leapfrog Tennessee or does Tennessee stay ahead? Um, I mean, I think that's the interesting part right now. Now, again, we have a long way to go and schedules will matter, but I think that's an interesting thing to think about here is Tennessee's still ahead of those teams. And I saw somebody bring up the point that let's say Tennessee wins out. And again, we're playing a lot of what ifs here. Um, Tennessee wins out. Let's say Oregon wins the Pac-12 and hasn't lost another game. What's the one thing those two teams have in common, right?
Georgia.
It's Georgia. And, so I think that becomes an interesting discussion if we get to that, scenario. Cause it's like, can you leave out a Pac 12 champion if, there's a spot open for a team that didn't play in its conference championship game, which we would assume in that scenario, Tennessee would not, Georgia would. It's kind of a fun thing to think about.
Yeah, to me it's 5 teams right now, and then it's everybody else. You look at what Oregon's done. Best win to date is UCLA. Got a chance to add on again. Utah would be a nice win. Washington, Oregon State would be, I guess, NIT type wins probably. And again, how does the committee factor that? I don't know. I just think to me right now it is a 5-team discussion unless something crazy happens.
Yeah. Just for the note on that, Oregon still has to play. If you're talking about, like you just said, Oregon still has to play Washington and Utah. USC still has to play UCLA and Notre Dame too, by the way. UCLA plays USC and Utah plays Oregon basically as their next big opportunity. So I think that's that's interesting to think about if you're a Pac-12, which I know there's not a lot of people in here that are, but if you are, Tennessee still. I just think, yeah. I mean, for TCU, I think it's pretty clear they have to win out to get in, right? I mean, I think one loss, they're done. I don't. But we always say it matters. What matters around you too. But I think in that scenario, I think 100%. If they But that's what we do know now, right? If TCU wins out, they're 100% in. Like, this is what tells us that in terms of how the rankings unfold this week, I think. So because you can't move them down if they don't lose, I don't think.
Well,
So
let's go. And I know we're making people's heads spin, and I apologize for that. But let's get back to the basics, okay? Let's look at Tennessee. Win over Alabama, win at LSU, followed by, for what it's worth, blowout win over Kentucky, win over Florida, win at Pitt. But let's just freeze it at 2 wins right now. Alabama and at LSU with an 11-1 record for the Vols. You're looking at Oregon, best case scenario, 11-1. Best wins would be UCLA and Utah. That just doesn't stack up to me. USC, right now, USC's best win is probably at Oregon State. You add on, you beat Notre Dame and UCLA. Okay, those are nice wins. Are they better than what Tennessee did? I don't think so. No, they're not, to be more definitive. And UCLA right now, best wins, Utah, Washington, and after that, probably South Alabama. Opportunity to add USC, but winning at Arizona and Cal aren't going to do anything. So I don't see UCLA as being really realistic in a one-loss scenario. And I guess you got the Pac-12 championship game. I didn't factor that in, but
yeah.
And maybe I still think beating Alabama, winning at LSU with some other nice wins in there, and the dominating fashion in which Tennessee has done it, I just think you start comparing Tennessee to one-loss teams, whether that be Michigan or the Pac-12. I still think Tennessee is the better team in that scenario, really under any circumstance. If you're looking at overall strength of schedule, if you're looking at quality wins, if you're just looking at dominance in what Tennessee does, scoring margin, yards per play, that kind of thing, I still think Tennessee comes out very favorably in whatever comparison you want to put forth at that point.
All right, a couple other SEC scenarios here. Is there any way Georgia gets left out if they make the SEC championship? I don't think so. Now, barring a 50-0 loss to, the SEC West representative or something, I think Georgia at this point. But see, that's where that discussion gets more interesting, right? Because if Georgia plays LSU in the SEC championship and LSU wins that game, then that's where I think you talk about a lot of things to figure out at that point. Because then we're not just having the other debates we've just had that are as confusing as can be. Like, we're having the Ohio State Michigan debate. We're having the, do both get in? Do one, we know one's getting in, but do both? Like, what happens to the loser? Then it's how can we find room for LSU? Because if TCU wins out, they're in. We just said, what happens with the Pac-12 champion in that scenario? Does LSU eclipse a Tennessee team that beat them by 27? Like, man, there are so many. Like, that's where, if you're rooting for madness, Chris, and I'm not talking about March Madness, we'll get there. If you're rooting for madness and unless you're a Georgia fan, you're probably not rooting for it, but an LSU winning out and beating Georgia in the SEC championship would be pure madness, I think, for how the college football playoff committee would try to figure out what the heck to do with this, because then you would have a real tough scenario on your hands, especially, again, let's say, and we're going to take this even stronger, especially in a scenario where Ohio State Michigan game is, a classic, and you have to figure out, we know one's getting in. Can we get both of them in? Or if TCU is still undefeated, I think at that point, the Tennessee debate would still be fascinating. What about the Pac-12 champion? If it's a one-loss Oregon, what do they have kind of in the say on that? Man, now that would be the ultimate chaotic situation, but we're a long way from getting there.
Yeah.
And by the way,
that's
all that
really
said,
good.
Chris, Clemson, not even in the discussion. I do not see a path for Clemson at all. And I'm sorry to Clemson fans, but I just do not see a path unless you just have, again, unless the 9 teams in front of them all lose games they shouldn't lose. I just think that path for Clemson is very, very small right now.
5:30, it's got Clemson with a 41% possibility of winning out. If Clemson wins out, It says 75% chance for the playoff. Again, I don't see it. I guess your scenario is, okay, here's what Clemson's done. It won at Wake. It won at Florida State. It beat Syracuse. That's lost some luster. Same with NC State. The other wins right now, Georgia Tech, Boston College, Louisiana Tech, don't matter. Louisville's been a sneaky good team. It's getting into the top 25 of the computers. That's a notch in the belt if Clemson wins it. Miami's not good. It's not going to matter. South Carolina at home is again, that's an NIT win for what it's worth. I just don't see the resume compared to other teams either. And we talked last week, Clemson's yard per play edge on other teams was less than a yard heading to that Notre Dame game. And I said last week, I just don't see Clemson as being as good as these other teams. Again, you've got good versus resume, and that one played out in resume with a loss.
Yeah, I don't, like I said, barring just unthinkable losses to the teams ahead of them, I do not see a path for Clemson. Because I think the committee made it very clear in this set of rankings that a one-loss Clemson does not have the resume right now that a 2-loss Alabama, 2-loss LSU, 1-loss Pac-12 representatives in Oregon, South Carolina, or excuse me, USC. I just think there are way too many teams ahead of them right now. Again, that unless they lose games they shouldn't lose, I don't think. I mean, overall for the ACC, right? I mean, yeah, you've got Carolina's at 15, NC State at 16, Florida State's at 23, but I mean, that's not. I think it's pretty clear what the thought is on the ACC, especially now with a 1-loss Clemson leading the way.
Yeah. No, the fascinating scenario to me is a 1-loss TCU, a 1-loss Tennessee, a 1-loss somebody from the Pac-12.
I think Tennessee is ahead in that scenario.
Well, I do too. And maybe the better question is, what do you do with TCU and what's left? Does LSU sneak in? Well, I mean, it would have to be Georgia, which if it does, LSU gets in that scenario, I think, anyway. LSU wins out, 81% chance of getting in, according to 538.
Oh, listen, I'm telling you, Chris, I think the style points, that is going to be a big theme for some of these teams if we get in these discussions. I think it's going to matter. I really do. Like you got to just put your foot down and not let up. I think because I think that's what the committee will want to see when you start getting yourselves in these kind of discussions as a 1-loss team. Because that's the thing. Something we have to remember here, and I know we've gone a bit long here, but we're just trying to have some fun with possible scenarios. But here's what we know. We do know that there are not going to be 4 undefeated teams by the time we get to the end of this thing, right? Because why?
Right.
Because Michigan and
by
Ohio State have to
definition,
play each other.
2 of them have to lose. One of them has to lose, right?
At best, there's going to be 3 undefeated teams, and if those 3 teams are still undefeated, they're all going to get in, which would be in that scenario Georgia, TCU, and winner of Ohio State, Michigan. It's going to once again be what everything else happen. What happens around that is going to make that fourth. That's where the committee's job. It's hard at that point to figure out that 4th team maybe, but it's much easier than trying to figure out some of these other scenarios of the discussion of the Pac-12 champion versus a Tennessee. As I said before, if LSU wins the SEC championship, they're getting in. I just don't see a path that they can leave them out at that point. So yeah, if you're the committee and you want your job to be easy, you're rooting for Georgia, TCU to stay undefeated. You're rooting for you're assuming Michigan, Ohio State are both going to be undefeated when they get to that matchup, which they may not be, but that's your assumption at this point. So yeah, this is actually more fun and entertaining than you think these college playoff rankings can be this early. But man, it's just there's so many wild scenarios you can play out in your mind. So,
well, our goal was to do this in 15 minutes.
Well, listen, we never hit our
time
goals.
I mean, it just shows you there's so many possibilities still.
Let's talk about Tulane's path.
Right. Tulane may have a path to a New Year's Day bowl. Good. But yeah, good for them.
Yeah.
Former SEC member.
Yeah. That's true.
Um, I'm just thinking if I'm the committee, I might have been secretly glad Notre Dame beat Clemson because then how hard is this?
Oh yeah, that's
Clemson
true.
wins at Notre
Yeah.
Dame, then you're just going, oh, you're just because you're
Oh
at
yeah.
some point you're looking for things to make it easier on you. But back to Georgia, you asked us a minute ago. What about a Georgia loss to LSU in the title game? Well, Georgia now you're looking at wins. Georgia earlier in this discussion, it was kind of like, well, you're basing Georgia in the playoff of how good you think Georgia is, not so much over who it's beaten. Well, now beating Tennessee, beating Oregon in a neutral site, although it wasn't really neutral. Those are two wins that are about as good as anybody's got. You've got the NIT wins over Florida, South Carolina, maybe Missouri. And then here's the other thing. Opportunities to win at Mississippi State and beat Kentucky, those are nice wins too. To me, Georgia at one loss, if that's to LSU, is getting in.
I think so too. That's what I said. I don't. If Georgia gets to the SEC championship, they're in my opinion. Now, again, if they lose by 8 touchdowns or something, we can obviously have a different discussion on that. But if they lose a quality game in the SEC championship and they're undefeated, I don't see how you can leave them out. Um, because you think about that though, Chris, right? Like that becomes more interesting too, because if we say that, if there's no way to leave Georgia out in that scenario, there's no way to leave out the team that beat them either. Like again, that's what
Right.
we keep saying, and that's where that team has to get in. So, oh my goodness, this is very fun. Like this is just going to be a wild race to the finish here. So,
There's one other possibility we haven't discussed.
oh, how is that even possible at this point?
Well, and it involves the SEC.
Oh boy,
We've
we bringing
not mentioned
Alabama
Ole
into
Miss.
this, or Alabama, or
Well,
Ole Miss?
okay.
Yeah,
Well, let's
I mean
bring
Alabama's
Alabama
at
into it
9.
too. Right. Okay. Ole Miss beats Alabama, wins out. 13% chance. I would have thought Ole Miss, a one-loss Ole Miss team, would have a better shot than that, but I guess not.
Still being behind Clemson.
And it's a wins issue. I mean, the best two wins Ole Miss has got right now are Kentucky, and you're gonna laugh, Texas A&M.
Mm,
But opportunity to beat Alabama, win at Arkansas, beat Mississippi State.
yeah.
The loss would be at LSU, which was Ole Miss did not look good that day, so that's why the probability is that low. Alabama, just for kicks. Oh, it's not good for Alabama. Alabama wins out. It goes from a 2% chance to a 3% chance, which is
Because I mean,
interesting to me because you win at Texas, you beat Mississippi State, you win at Arkansas. At that point, you would have a win at Ole Miss. I guess that's about where we run out of gas here. I mean, that presumes a win at Auburn, which doesn't mean much.
Yeah, their only path, Chris, to the SEC championship is for LSU to lose out and Ole Miss. Well, am I right on that?
Say that again.
Alabama's path to the SEC championship would be for them to win out. They'd need LSU to lose out. I think that's right, isn't it? Because LSU holds the tiebreaker. And again, we're playing things that just probably not going to happen. So, yeah, I can see why the percentage is that low for Alabama. So,
what you're saying is Alabama needs an SEC championship game win. In fact, 538 does not even register the possibility
yeah, I was
of
going to say
Alabama winning the
think
SEC.
that's I don't think that's in the cards this season.
Yeah, LSU would have to lose at Arkansas, at Texas A&M. So there you go. That's why.
Yeah, which is probably not going to happen. I don't think so.
Yeah.
Could they lose one of those? I'm sure, but I don't. Yeah, if they play like they've been playing, they're going to win both of those. So,
I just for fun to make sure we're covering our bases, I ran a USC. I'm sorry, UNC winning out scenario.
oh boy. 1%.
Oh, wait a minute. Okay.
3%.
No, actually they've got UNC as a 6% chance to make the playoff. Oh my goodness. Okay. Do you want to have your mind blown?
It's all right. That was 15 minutes ago, Chris. It's too late for that.
Okay. UNC's got a 6% chance of the playoff. If it wins out, a 51% chance. Now, I don't think that team belongs in the playoffs.
Let me ask you this. Who's running 538? Is it an ACC grad? Because I don't know what in
It
the
might
world
be.
the computer person in charge there has in their mind that if either of these teams went out, they may move up, but unless there is just, again, unbelievable scenarios that happen in front of them to the other numerous teams that are ahead, I just do not see the
I
ACC
don't see that either.
getting in at this point. Now, look, that now I'm not even going to say that. Like, I don't see it. Because here's hold on, just real quickly. Gosh, we've gone long here. I hope I know you guys are probably like these guys are coming up with every scenario possible, but this is what we do. It's a gift and a curse. Because here's what they would have to move ahead of, right? You would have to move ahead of the presumed Pac-12 champion, which I suppose if it's not Oregon or USC, maybe that debate gets more interesting because UCLA and Utah are still behind Clemson at this point. You'd have to move ahead of at probably at worst, a one-loss TCU, which I suppose could be possible. I'm not even getting into I don't see it. So
Okay. This gets better. You'd think we have exhausted everything, and we haven't.
oh my goodness. I'm exhausted.
You're like, just shut up now. Okay. 538 says if USC wins out, 82% chance of making the playoff. If Utah wins out, 27% chance of making the playoff.
Because they have an
And let's do UCLA. UCLA a 58% chance. So this sees the Pac-12
No,
is getting a team in here. Oregon,
well,
88% if it wins out.
yeah. That's where I think, again, the discussion gets interesting because I do think, because look where they're ranked right now. Like you have Oregon at 6, USC at 8, and then you've got UCLA at 12. Now, the problem for Utah is what? They've already got 2 losses. So even if they went out, I still think it's a hard task. But the one-loss teams went out. I do think that gets more interesting. And that's why I keep saying I see. Let me ask you this right now. All right. And we're wrapping this thing up. The one loss Pac 12 champion to me, I mean, I say that if it's USC or Oregon, are getting in over Clemson. If
For
Clemson has a
sure.
one loss as ACC champion. Yes. So I don't think
I would
there's,
think.
yeah. And then it's like, okay, if LSU doesn't win the SEC championship, they're out of the picture. So you can take them off the board. Like we said, Alabama, barring just a collapse from LSU or Ole Miss, off the board. Then it becomes Tennessee. And that's where, when I think we started this conversation, I said that's going to be the interesting discussion is if Tennessee wins out and then you've got the Pac 12 champion with one loss, does that champion jump Tennessee in that scenario? And I think that's where
I don't think so. I
that's where it gets
think
interesting.
well, and that's where conference championships and the emphasis the committee puts on them
Yep.
matter. If it's me, I'm not putting any of those teams in over Tennessee. But that's me. If you want to hate me even more, I'm just going to bring this up and I'll leave it here, and then we can wrap up.
God.
I don't see how this is even possible. I'm souring on the 538 predictor a little bit by the
No,
moment.
I have, yeah. That was about 15 minutes ago too on that. Clemson,
If
the ACC.
Texas wins out, Texas, which has lost 3 times, a 32% chance to
Get out. Okay, that's anything. Can we? I'm the one that has to edit this stuff. Anybody who wants to, we will hire you as an editor. All you have to do is go and remove every 538 reference we've ever made on this show, because that's all I need to hear. Yeah, that's not going to work. So
Okay, takeaways. Honestly, I think if resume matters, to me, a one-loss Tennessee just looks better in every scenario. That's me thinking. We're SEC guys, so if you want to take shots at us, if you're the Pac-12, fine. But I mean, it's been the best conference for a long time, year in and year out. Maybe not every year, but it's the best conference this year. I still think a one-loss Tennessee, and I don't see the Vols losing again. Just the more I look at this, I don't see Tennessee getting left out. It could
Of the
happen, but I don't think
conversation.
it's likely.
You mean of the conversation, not necessarily of the playoff, right? Because
No,
are you are
I
you saying if
I keep coming back to the same place. Don't care what TCU does. It makes it a little harder if TCU wins out, but I just think
yeah.
it's going to be Georgia's going to be in.
You're
It's
saying you
going to
think Tennessee gets in over a one-loss Michigan or Ohio State?
I do.
Okay.
Especially if it's Michigan.
I agree on that one. I think the Ohio State one probably gets more. But listen, we're saying all this. I'm telling you right now, how the game plays out matters, and that's going to be a big part of it because you still got the Big Ten championship game too. Like there are still a lot of factors that are to be determined there.
The
Yeah,
nightmare scenario for Tennessee, and this is ironic because a lot of Tennessee's case is built on winning at LSU. I think the most likely scenario where Tennessee doesn't get in, presuming Tennessee wins out, is if LSU beats Georgia in the title game. Then I think Tennessee gets knocked out, which is just so
listen,
bizarre given what happened in Baton Rouge. Or maybe at that point, that's when that discussion comes into focus. It becomes not who are the best four teams, it becomes a Tennessee LSU argument. And then everybody says, well, they played, and look how that played out.
all right. If you want the committee to have the toughest job possible, if you're someone who roots for chaos, I'm going to repeat what I said earlier. This is what you're rooting for. You're rooting for LSU to beat Georgia. And Georgia fans, I know you're not rooting for this, but if you're chaos non Georgia fans, you're rooting for LSU to beat Georgia in the SEC championship. You are rooting for Ohio State and Michigan to play one of the greatest games in the history of college football. You are rooting for TCU to go undefeated. You are rooting for Oregon, in my opinion, to win the Pac-12 because I think that makes the discussion way more interesting with Tennessee. And you're rooting for Tennessee to win out. In that scenario, good luck if you're the committee because you're going to get roasted some way, shape, or form by multiple teams, not one team, multiple teams in that scenario. So that is the ultimate chaos scenario if you're rooting for that.
Let's just solve this now. Let's override the NCAA. Let's go to 12 teams starting this year.
Please think about how we would have saved 25 minutes if we'd have gone to 12 teams because then we would have said, all right, you know what? UCLA and Oregon or UCLA and Utah, whoever, like, winner, you're in. That's it. Discussion closed. North Carolina, according to 538, you got a 100% chance to make the playoff. But elsewhere, you got a 0% chance. Texas, somehow with 3 losses, you could still be in the conversation. 538 probably just jumped you up to 80%. So there you go.
The one takeaway from this is that we're less high on 538's model than we were to start the podcast.
I mean, I never officially said that, but
Oh, you all but said it.
all right, here we go. 38 minutes on this.
The best part of this is the way this is going to play out, because it always does. Is there going to be some scenario that somehow in exhausting every possibility, but
yes, there will be
putting
something
Florida
we
Atlantic in the playoff,
discussed.
we did not come up with it.
Alabama will get there somehow, some way. Like, just we know how this works. So, yeah. Ole Miss, I don't. It's just chaos, man. So,
hey, don't take it too seriously. This is fun. We're having fun with it.
if you don't
Even
think
if
we don't
we're
do our
more
research
confused than
and
when we started.
and we don't look at the data and the numbers, I hope this past 39 minutes here have given you a really clear insight into we exhaust the data and the numbers sometimes, and we have hit that point here. So
sometimes I think doing less research is better, because the more I do, the more confused I get.
Well, I won't disagree with you there.
It's too much. I will stand by, though. I still think a 1-loss Tennessee. I just look at this and I think that got a really good shot to get in, unless it's the conference championship thing starts trumping other things, which it very well could.
There you go. All right, that's part one of the college football playoff reaction. Part two, we'll look at NC State, Kansas State, Notre Dame, UCF, Kentucky. Sorry, Kentucky fans. We'll get to you in part two of this 8-part series coming soon.
If you are still with us at this point,
there's no one still with us at this point.
Here's what we need. Should we drop like a cookie in here?
Leave in the comments
if we do a live stream tonight. What's the secret word to drop in the comments?
I don't know.
If you got this far,
what was George's password for his Bosco? Was that it? The password for his, I don't remember, ATM code. Yeah, Bosco. If you're still with us 40 minutes, George Costanza's ATM code, Bosco. Drop that in the comments. So there you go.
Yeah. All right. He's Blake Lovell. I'm Chris Lee. Oh, quick shout out to our sponsor, Steaks. I knew there was something we forgot, and it's Steaks, and you shouldn't forget Steaks.
Steaks has got a 28% chance to make the college football playoff, according to 538.
Right. We'll have something on Steaks about this when we get there. Okay, you could predict sports better than the crowd. For a chance to win NFTs with Steaks, players can submit their sports predictions against friends, other fans, and influencers forever. Don't let your sports genius go overlooked. Join Steaks and have the best predictions captured in the moment. Go to playwithstakes.com/14. Use our invite code Southeastern14 for a double welcome bonus. Well, thank you for watching. We've got a Wednesday night live stream where we will
repeat this probably 30 minutes of this. We just did. Oh my goodness.
I'm going back to like the 5-minute mark or whenever I started my thing, which you may edit out. So at that point, people.
No, we're not. This is going in full. So we're gonna see who the diehards are with this.
If someone didn't tune me out by that point, then God bless you and thank you. I would have tuned myself out. Okay. Thanks for watching. We'll see you Wednesday night on our live stream. Basketball content is here. Basketball season's here. We got that too. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.